All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Amelia Niger, and I'm the Education Specialist with the Oracle Applications and Technology Users Group. I'm very excited to welcome you all to the Cloud EPM and Hyperion Week session titled Sailing from Hyperion 11.1.2.4 to 11.2.6 with Ease, and now navigating towards 11.2.9. Before we get started, I'd like to mention that in addition to the OATUG regular e-learnings, we do put on themed education weeks like this one throughout the year. So be sure to look out for those on our events page. And make sure to save the date for our Ascend conference next year. It will be at the Caribe Royale Resort in Orlando from June 11th to the 14th. Just a quick reminder for today's webinar, you will be on mute throughout the session. However, you are welcome to send questions at any time through the chat area in the Zoom platform. We will address questions at the end of the webinar. If you are interested in receiving CPE credit, your participation is required, so make sure you're logged into the webinar for at least 50 minutes and ask a question in the chat area. Additional information about Cloud EPM and Hyperion Week can be found on our website's landing page. We are recording this session, and the recording as well as the slide deck will be available to Cloud EPM Week attendees and OATUG members in the knowledge base. You'll see the link for that in the chat area shortly. And now I'd like to turn it over to today's presenter, Shandy Bergeron, Senior Database Administrator from Datavale. So thanks so much for presenting today, Shandy, and you can take it away.
All right, thank you, Amelia. Good afternoon. Actually, I'm in the Central Time Zone, so good afternoon and good morning to those that are on the West Coast from myself. My name is Shandy Bergeron, and I'll get into the bio in just a second. But as Amelia outlined, our focus today is kind of outlining Hyperion upgrades. So really focusing on the on-prem, using a global cruise company to kind of facilitate our session today, going from the 11.124 version up to 11.2.6 and beyond. So we'll go ahead and get started here. Just kind of outlining Datavale, where I work is a sponsor this week. So, we can definitely be reached out to for any of your Hyperion needs. Another thing to kind of outline here is there is going to be an evaluation after the presentation. So we'd love to have any and all feedback. And so, and I believe this slide will come up again at the end to get the link as well. So there's a Fire TV Cube up for grabs. A little bit about myself. So I'm a senior Oracle Apps DBA within the both the EBS and the EPM practices here at Datavale. I've been here for 11 years, both at Datavale and in the industry. Really helping kind of all aspects of the infrastructure for both of those areas. A lot of my focus in the last couple of years have been facilitating the upgrades such as the one we'll be talking about today, getting up from the 11.124 version or any version for that matter, up to the latest and greatest. And not just upgrading, but solutioning a environment that best fits a customer's needs. So really digging into not just a cookie cutter upgrade, but also determining the best path for that. So a little bit about ourselves here at Datavale. We are a consulting and managed service customer that translates technology into business values. We are partners across the board with Oracle, Microsoft, AWS, all the sorts. We do have 18 Oracle specializations. We do many different services from both a project and operational managed service perspective. In the project area, anywhere from health checks to migrations, data migration and conversions, even cloud system consulting, and a few others listed there where we even have, operationally managed support, day-to-day operations, even migrations, optimization, tuning, also as well as, service requests. Not only do we have our own systems to be able to support, we can also work on your behalf with Oracle as well. Monitoring and proactive ticket management, if you will, or incident management, and then also, of course, the proactive side of things. We've been in business for over 15 years, with just over 1,200 consultants under the covers. We've had many different implementations performed under our watch. And we've been involved in the cloud for over 10 years now. So we have a lot of experience there, whether it be, infrastructure as a service, product as a service, you name it. We have very good customer retention at over 500 plus with, over 7 years, 12 plus focused industries. And we also have a very heavy footprint in IP that does improve the service experience and drives efficiency. So a lot of good that has come out of that so far. As far as the Hyperion practice, we do specialize in pretty much anything cloud-based. So EPBCS, DRM, and EDM, financial management. We have planning, SBase, ARCs, narrative reporting, and of course, financial close and consolidation. So we have experts in all those fields ready and willing to support. Kind of a repeat of the past slide. We do have, many Oracle specializations, lots of years. Just kind of quickly glide over that into this next piece here. A lot of different industries that we focus on. So professional services, distribution, financial services, of course, natural, oil and gas, manufacturing, aerospace and defense, you name it, we have been in support of those areas. So what we're going to do today, we're going to kind of go over, here's a high level, the agenda. So really want to start from the ground up and go all the way through to the end of what I would consider this upgrade. So starting with the decisions to move from 11.124 up to 11.26, and then from there, kind of go into what drove the decision to move up to, at the time, 11.2.9. So as you know, there's many different variants, or if you may not know, 11.2 the Oracle has changed the delivery of the new patch sets for the 11.2 version, and we will get into that in just a bit and kind of explain some of the decisions leading up to that point. For this situation, this environment, we did have a change in infrastructure. So we changed not only from one version of Hyperion to the next, but we also changed our operating systems. We'll get into that as well. Enhancements to the existing footprint. So not just migrations, but also we had a big opportunity here to perform beneficial enhancements or improvements to what the customer was using day to day. And of course, with everything comes the challenges. So I'm going to cover some of the areas there that maybe stumped us or really provided us a complex solution need. And then, of course, at the end, or we'll cap it off with the benefits of getting up to the latest releases. So that being said, kind of jumping into the decisions. So as you know, there was a lot there can be a wide variety of reasons to go from one version to the next. And really the first one that comes to mind, not just for this customer, but most of that we work with, is the end of support for 11.124. As you know, originally the end date was I believe it was December of 2020. However, that did get pushed given the global pandemic to the end of 2021. Bought some customers a little extra time, this one as well. And so when it came closer to the time of that product going out of support is when we really started jumping in and having these discussions and determining what route we were going to go. They also wanted to standardize their equipment. So with this upgrade, the customer did decide that they wanted to keep all infrastructure in-house. So it was discussed from not just a PaaS offering, but also a cloud-based infrastructure model. We also talked about that. They did decide internally that they wanted to keep it in-house. So new hardware was obtained. The one big difference there is they did want to move to a different OS. I know I mentioned that high level, so we'll get into that in a bit, but the OS change was a big difference for them as well. And then really deciding at the time, so these discussions really started back in probably, September or October of last year. So at the time, there were a few different options available to go to. So as I mentioned, 11.2 has been released, a new dot release almost every quarter. So we have 11.2.0 all the way up through what's today available of 11.2.10. Traditionally, this customer would go to n-1. So they would usually go to whatever is one less than the latest, and there were a few different options available at the time, because again, it was still from our perspective, it was still a little unknown how Oracle was going to kind of streamline their upgrade abilities, if you will. A lot of the dot release upgrades for Hyperion up until that point were a pretty large undertaking. And so, we presented to them the options of going, like I said, at the time, it was really focused around 11.2.4, 5, and 6. However, when we made the decision, we also took into account what was the most beneficial. And at the time, Oracle was really making vast improvements from a quarter to quarter basis on these dot releases. So we really were comfortable, and we had tested a lot of this in some sandbox environments, things like that. Done some internal testing on our side, and really evaluated the pros and cons of going to what we considered at the time the latest version. So we were able to convince them to do so. Again, we starting in non-prod, starting in a development environment, feeling it out, and letting them, confirm the same. So at the time, it was decided to go to 11.2.6. Again, the bug fixes were pretty drastic from version to version. In earlier releases of 11.2, from our experience, there were some issues. Some of the paths to upgrade were a little more complex than they could have been, or that they were starting to become in the later versions. And just, again, I'll stress it again, the sheer number of bug fixes in the original or the earlier versions were enough to support that decision. And if you haven't seen it, Oracle has updated their patch advisor tooling as well. So for EPM, it really helped us present to the customer what really was being updated, as opposed to just pulling up, say, a README and visualize or seeing a list of bug fixes. We were able to use their latest patch advisor tooling to outline really the different products and what parts of those products were being fixed in each subsequent release. So then again, as I mentioned, not only did we go to 11.2.6, but through the process, right after we officially went live, we kind of continued the project on and got them to the latest release of 11.2.9. So that was released back in April of 2022. And so they're kind of the same idea. There were large numbers of bug fixes that were very significant to the overall environment. And while not all pertained to the customer specific footprint, it aided in the decision to go to that release. When in what we've seen, going to, at least starting from 11.2.6, going to 11.2.8, that was really the biggest. That was really the last big update or upgrade, if you will, that we've seen. And of course, Safe Harbor applied, but with 11.2.9 and what we've seen in our initial review of 11.2.10 that just came out, the process has really been streamlined. It's as simple as executing an apply update command right from the server level, as opposed to running, say, the whole configurator that many are used to in the past. Even talking bug fixes, one example of what we encountered was something as simple as copy paste functionality within the Microsoft Edge browser. While it seems small, organizational policies actually limited the use of different or additional browsers that ended up causing a big deal. It was a big hurdle for the end users to get past. So there was a lot of value in showing them that, okay, look, here's something that was actually fixed in one of these subsequent releases. Again, further solidifying the benefit at this point to going to the latest version, which Oracle is really pushing as well. And if I focus on the 11.2.9 update, what used to take somewhere in the neighborhood of, I think, roughly 16 gigabytes of media every time you'd put in an update, you'd have to download the entire set from eDelivery, run the update through the config tool, and then delete it when you're done. What they've kind of changed and streamlined from 11.2.8 and as of today beyond, up through 11.2.10 is it takes it down to probably what I've seen so far is anywhere from 1 to about 3 gigabytes in size. So much smaller footprint as far as what you need to store media from, as well as, like I said, you don't have to run the config tool anymore. You don't have to go through that entire process. What you do is you basically on each server in the environment, you go out and there's documented statements from Oracle in the patch set. That's it's a variation of the apply update command. And what it does then is it runs it right on the server, and of course, you run it on each server in the environment, and it takes much less time, much cleaner. And the biggest benefit I would call it is it has a rollback process. So some of the lesser or lower versions, if you will, backups are of course still critical, but they were much more critical back then if you ran into an issue. Whereas now you can rely on backups, but you also have an option to roll back the patches if you do find an issue. Like I said, one shot, it includes everything from not just the EPM products. So, if it's planning, if it's Essbase, if it's HFM, all of that, including Java and WebLogic. And where Java and WebLogic are concerned, as well as OHS. Where those three components are concerned, Java, WebLogic, and OAS, they're running N-1 versions. So where the products are all updated at that, for that month, where the July 2022 release would be given, it would contain the April update. So with that, this customer chose to also then update those three products after the fact as well to bring them up to the latest versions. So like I said, very clean, very, very smooth process. It does still allow you to update those components, those in being Java, WebLogic, OHS, if you'd like, but everything is very nicely packaged nowadays. So that really benefited and aided in the decision to go up to 11.2.9, as well as what we are currently discussing with them to go to 11.2.10. So then we'll talk a little bit here about the changes in infrastructure. So as I mentioned, one of the big things that they had in their existing environment was they had a multi-operating system environment. So what they had was their foundation components were on a Windows machine, and then they had Essbase on a Linux machine. And their primary focus for this was planning in Essbase. So we had foundation, planning, EAS, reporting. We had all that on the foundation, and then pure Essbase lived on the Linux server. So what they wanted to do was they actually made the decision to go 100% Linux. And if you know it or not, HFM is the big decider there. This environment doesn't happen to have it, whereas HFM is not certified yet on Linux. So we didn't have to worry about that component. What we were able to do was we were able to migrate it all, which in their eyes presented a list of benefits from the customer's perspective. So they had, the OS overhaul, they had outdated infrastructure that was being eliminated, in their very old version of Linux. Not just from the Hyperion side, but from their internal IT perspective, security, as with most customers or most companies today, became a very big point of discussion. And so getting up to the latest versions that were possible was a big item, not just from operating system support, but the security of the operating system, the system management, the standardization of what they were using. On top of some of the other components in their environment that they were using day to day, where, for example, they had some file sharing solutions. In this case, it was the Samba tool, which presents a file system to both Windows and Linux, but it also creates a backdoor of sorts. In their eyes, it eliminated a lot of their security. And in that aspect, it allowed a lot of people to be able to just nonchalantly jump onto the server and start moving files around in certain locations. So they wanted to move away from that. So in that process, we were able to implement full SFTP processing for file placement and movement. So it then effectively eliminated, your general users' access to the system and really restricted it down to key users, key accounts, and in a very secure connectivity manner. And then, of course, with that came the enhancements. So in this process, not only were we doing the upgrade, but we were also taking a lot of their existing day-to-day processing that had been in place and been used for many, many years, where yes, it could be considered as if it's not broke, don't fix it. There was a lot of benefit to be gained as far as their day-to-day processing. So things like their nightly backups. So not only, again, we did move from Windows to Linux for some things, but we were also able to take that and standardize it to where they had, for example, their existing backup scripts were very individual. You couldn't take it necessarily from one environment to the next because it was hard coded. It had a lot of credentials stored. A lot of these things that we were able to take and standardize to where not only did we make it so where we could take the same backup script, in this case, not just for LCM, but also S-based data. We were able to take the same script and move it from environment to environment, and having a config file of sorts that we specify our variables. We have placed encrypted credentials, so nothing is in plain text anymore. Again, that was a big, talking about the security, that was a very big part of what they wanted to achieve. So we were able to do that and really, modernize their backup process. So where we used to take was a nightly backup, very simple. It worked, but it was very, all the logs had plain text passwords. Like I said, they were hard coded, so we would have to rewrite it for each environment. We were able to work it from the ground up and standardize that to where now logs don't contain passwords. Even the config files don't contain passwords. And with a series of variables in the call command, we could take it and place it effectively in any environment that they have. So again, like I said, not just LCM, but S-based data backups from both levels. We also have scripts, built for all data and level 0. So there's a lot of different variations and combinations that we were able to implement in the environment for them. And then the same thing goes for, we also had the file watcher script. So kind of tying into the SFTP implementation, they had a broken process before that only worked some of the time. That would, it was hit or miss on if it would catch the file that it was, if you place a file in a certain location, it would sometimes catch the file, sometimes it wouldn't. And so we really evaluated and rebuilt their file watcher process to where not only were we able to put in a process that we were able to confirm worked all the time, but we were also able to add in success warning and error logging, and alerting on top of that. So we were able to let them know what was going on at any time. They knew if they placed a file at a certain time of the day within X number of minutes or hours, they should be getting a status message of some sort, and fine tune it down to the users that need to be, as opposed to just either a full blast or an individual basis, or just not knowing at all. So on top of this, there were a lot of, a lot of little things that we were able to enhance as well. Just some kind of, with years of adjusting the system, we really took this as an opportunity to not just clean up the environment, but make it more efficient, standardized process for them. And they were, pretty happy with that at the end of the day. And then, so moving on to the challenges. So as with anything, it always presents a set of challenges. I've had very few projects go completely as expected, and by very few, I can count them on almost less than one hand. So it's also, running into those challenges, but benefiting and moving on from them as well. So for this environment, one of the biggest things was with the migration of the operating system, we had to change their existing code base, built for Windows, to a Linux variant. And there were some discussions at first about, do we, everything that they had before was written in VB script. So there was some discussions about putting the VB script module on Linux, which I don't know much about personally, but I knew it was an option. The downside to that was, there was a statement made, and I think it was more for a different part of the system, that they were ending support for VB script. So that really drove our decision. And And the customer was in complete agreement that we wanted to standardize it anyways. So we decided the decision was made to go to Perl, to take it away from Windows. And so what that really presented us the challenge of was being able to do so and provide the same results. So we do have, actually at Datavale, we do have a team, a full development team that was able to step up and assist in that and really provide the customer with removing the platform dependency by going to Perl and testing and confirming it has the same action. We were able to take that. So if they do move to something else in the future, it's easy to just move over, where they were fairly limited at first. So that was really a big win for not just us, but them as well, being able to move to a different coding language and still have the same expected outcome. But it was a challenge to determine, what level of code. There was a large code base that they did have to adjust. So it was a big change. Another challenge that we ran into was really some of the anomalies, the installation configuration anomalies that came with some earlier versions of 11.2. There was a lot, and this was more, kind of from a historical perspective. Some of the early updates from, say, 11.2, if I just use an example of 11.2.3, getting up to 11.2.4 or 11.2.5 presented some complexities. Things like the patching wasn't consistent. They weren't removing the patches beforehand. They would deploy incorrectly. So sometimes we would see in the deployment phase or the installation phase of the update, it would try to deploy something, say the updated OHS folder to the file system, and it would fail. And when we would go out to look at it, it was practically empty. This then resulting in the need to manually go out and clean up the file system, because there was no level of backup that we could use to work around or get past the upgrade issue itself. It was essentially one where you had to run the update, confirm that the issue happened, clean up the file system manually, and then effectively rerun the update once again. And that was on each and every server in the environment. And things like I said, OHS folder would present itself broken. It would fail on the deployment. Other things where you didn't have, say, OHS necessarily installed, you could find out, and the config tool would actually present you with a success message. You would see things like the OPatch or the patching tool, you would see at the wrong version, whereas it normally would have been initially installed as a, I'll call it a .5 or a .6 release, would show up as a .0. And that was a bigger problem. That, not just did that show me the patch tool was broken, but all the components surrounding that had some sort of issue. So it really provided us a bit of a hesitation when it came to upgrading, post 11.2 in implementation. Fortunately, that has seemed to have been remediated quite a bit in the later versions. We have not been seeing that, but at the time of this install, that was a big challenge we faced, and not just from us as implementers, but also the customer's comfortability with the environment. It really presented them with hesitation to say, yeah, we're really happy we went with this approach. So it took a lot of work, but we did get there. We got it stabilized, and they are now at a version that is past that point. And then another one that really kind of surprised us was there were uncertain differences in the SBase config that we would put in place at first, and it would actually cause a failure of the initial planning app creation. So whether we did an import or whether we did an initial outline creation manually and then imported data and such artifacts on top of that, we couldn't, for the life of us at first, we could not get the config to take. It would always fail. So in working with Oracle support and discussing, at first we thought maybe the patch level of SBase was causing a problem. It wasn't packaged with the dot release that we were working with. Maybe it was something else. Well, none of what we tried we could get to really work without really digging in. And what we ended up figuring out was when we initially migrated over, our first step was to copy the settings over from their existing 11.124 environment. And when I say settings, I'm more specifically talking about the SBase config settings What we were seeing was when we would just copy them over from one environment to the next, that's when our issues arose. Because when we took the config file back to a vanilla or a base level configuration, there was no issue. It worked flawlessly. The app created. However, now they did have some very specific app level settings that they needed for their processing that were now, removed from the config file. So we then kind of turned this into because a scenario where we really did a lot of evaluation on every single setting that you could put into the config file, understanding what it did from the ground up, seeing if there was something that wasn't necessary anymore, seeing if there was things that we missed that may need to be added. At the end of the day, we didn't ever pinpoint the exact cause of the failure, but what we were able to do is we were able to understand and analyze for the customer very in-depth information regarding how the config file was set up, what settings, their environment. We were able to review each and every setting with a fine-tooth comb, and not just from our side, but their side got agreement. And I would say the win for us there is we haven't had to touch any tuning for that since we implemented it, because we were able to do so in such extensive, so extensively. So I think that was really a big benefit for us at that point. All right, and then kind of getting to the end here, benefits of upgrading. So as you know, supported platforms. So to date, Oracle, if I speak to Hyperion, Oracle is continuing to push out the end of life date for Hyperion 11.2. At this point, as of this writing, it has been pushed out to 2032. Of course, Safe Harbor applies for future releases, but as of today, that is the end date. So it's a good 10 years of support coming for your current versions of 11.2. Operating systems are continuing to be updated to a newer, more supported version. As of right now, we're looking at Microsoft SQL Server, not just operating system, but database support. The big thing, if I jump back to the operating system for just a moment, the biggest thing there is we still haven't to date seen Linux 8 or Red Hat or Oracle Linux 8, Enterprise Linux 8 support. So we're still waiting on that. Hoping we'll see that soon. But other than that, we've seen a lot. We see Microsoft SQL Server 2019 added. Additional Oracle database versions are being added regularly. It's actually up currently through Oracle Database 21C, with the exception of Oracle Autonomous Database, which if you're familiar with the cloud, that's one of the options that they provide. I'm excited to see that come through at some point because I think that will be really beneficial. But as of today, we're not quite there yet. Database 21C is there, Autonomous Database not quite yet. But it has also brought in the support of Essbase 21C. It's been added to the list. At first it was more just from a reporting perspective, but now they're saying it's supported from many different aspects, not just from reporting, but from planning and from Essbase. It's a little different configuration as if, for the current 11.2 footprint, some may or may not know that Essbase is still 11.124 under the covers. It's like, I believe the latest is the .047 release of Essbase, which is pretty new. It's not truly what I would call 11.124. It's more updated. However, it does still carry the 11.124 tag. And so with a slightly different configuration, you can actually bring in Essbase 21C. So I think that's going to help. That's going to make a lot of people happy here in the near future. And of course, Microsoft Windows Server 2019 as of today is supported on top of the SQL Server Database 2019. So the latest versions of that are also included. Another piece of this is, for them, it was system performance and stability. One of the things that we had seen consistently well, not just in this environment, but with a lot of them, is 11.2 seems to perform better. It seems to perform more optimally when comparing to the likes of the same 11.124 footprint. And I know, we did have an operating system move in this particular project. If I speak to that for a second, what we've also seen is, Linux tends to be more efficient in our findings than what their Windows equivalent was. On top of the general performance, we're seeing that there was also a benefit for them by going to full Linux. Not just a performance enhancement, but I would tell you they've been much more stable. They had an unexplainable, even Oracle couldn't explain it, where EAS would just crash randomly. It would it wouldn't present any signs of any sort of, say out of memory or stuck threads. It wouldn't present any of that, and it would just crash. We presented it to Oracle. They couldn't figure it out. They weren't sure. Well, once we upgraded to 11.2 or to the Linux system, that entire problem went away, just completely went away. So again, without necessarily the understanding of what it was in the existing, the new migration or the new upgrade did benefit us in that aspect. So, and like I said, legitimately speaking, 100% remediation or alleviation of that issue. And then if I talk to the versioning, 11.2.8 is currently the latest, what I'll call the large release or baseline. So again, Safe Harbor applies with future updates, but 11.2.8 was the last baseline or the last version that you needed to download the full package. So once you're at that version, once you're at the 11.2.8, from there on out, it looks to be the simple apply update command. So the maintenance of the system gets much smoother. A smoother transition during update cycles, less overhead testing. You are pinpointing more of a specific area of the system as opposed to what I would call the entire blanket update. So when it comes to, say, whether it be us as IT professionals or the business users performing their validations with these smaller, better packaged updates, you really start to see a lot better, a lot smoother and a lot more pinpointed validation process, not just for us, but for the customer, contacts as well. And they've appreciated that as well. Instead of saying, well, it's a full upgrade, you have to handle every corner of the system, we can say, okay, it looks like there's a planning update in this one, so go ahead and test out the planning service or something of that nature. So very appreciative of that. And that's really all, like I said, all I have for the discussion. So I mentioned this was going to come up at the end again. The session evaluation here. Here's the link again, and we could provide it as well if need be. But I think it really opens up into the Q&A. And I think I see a handful that may have come through here. Let's see if I
do. Thank you,
yes.
Shanny. That was awesome. So I'll go ahead and just take it from the top and we'll start there. So it looks like from James, his question is, have you encountered issues with deploying to SBase in parentheses planning or HPCM when upgrading to 11.28 plus versions from versions less than 11.2.7, for example, upgrading from 11.2.5 to 11.2.8?
Yeah, it's a great question. So particularly if I talk about the upgrade itself, SBase or planning per se, I haven't done much work with HPCM, but SBase and planning, particularly, there's not really much of an issue that we haven't encountered any specifically for those products. Where I would say our greater complexities are really around the areas where the upgrade tool itself doesn't quite hit it almost acts, I know, kind of jumping around here a bit, but it almost acts as if it's not running the upgrade as an admin user, so to speak. So it's acting as if it doesn't have full file permissions or full admin rights on the server, and so it's not deploying the products right. But what we see is, it's config tools are run as the admin user, and nothing that we have done to get to that point is incorrect per the standard. So it's really been what we've seen is more specifically in the getting to, say, the 11.2.6 area. 11.2.7 and up are much better in that regard, is probably a better way to put it. Where we start eliminating those kinds of issues. And so to confirm on that, even if you're at if you say 11.2.5, even 11.2.4, you can upgrade directly to 11.2.8. You have to get to that point before going further. But what I've seen personally, and what we've seen from our perspective in assisting in many of these different upgrades and updates, if you will, is using the later versions or the later packaging seems to avoid or eliminate those issues. It definitely takes a lot of that concern out of the mix. But as far as the product specific, I haven't seen anything in particular. Just more the kind of the overarching system level complexities.
All right, thank you. It looks like our next question from G. Douglas is how long generally have you seen it take from going from 11.2.6 to 11.2.9?
Yeah, great question as well. So we actually did just that as in this case study. So at the time of upgrading, we were at 11.2.6. We went to 11.2.8 as it was a requirement, and went to 11.2.9 from there. We did take one outage window for it. So as far as timings go, your biggest time consumption comes into the area of waiting for the update to finish. You do have to do it on each server. Now, I will say that the 11.2.8 version is much quicker than say if you were to go from 11.2.4 to 11.2.6. So for this environment, it's a 2-server environment. Well, let me rephrase that: 2-server plus a database server. We don't always count the database server in our numbers. So we have our foundation and our S-base server that need the tool or the update run against it. And I would realistically tell you that if you don't have an extensive footprint, you're looking at maybe in the area of 30 to 45 minutes per cycle, and that might be giving you a little cushion. So cycles being you have 11.2.6 to 11.2.8, and then 11.2.8 to 11.2.9. So 11.2.8 to 9 is much quicker. I will definitely say that. The biggest question, like I said, it really varies on footprint, how many corners of the system the tool has to hit. But you could safely, I think realistically, you could safely count for an hour for each task, if you will, on each server, and that should give you a little bit of cushion. But it wasn't as extensive as some in the past. I know, like even like if I use another example, we went from 11.2.4 to 11.2.7, and that ended up for this particular customer was almost 3 hours per cycle per server. So it was a pretty extensive from there. Definitely seems to have been streamlined later on in the process.
All right. Next question from Monique. What documentation would you recommend on the config file settings?
So yeah, there is, and I'd have to pull it up, Oracle's guide on the S-base config settings. If you specifically point to the 11.124 version, was what we found to be the most beneficial or the most valuable. It has very extensive amounts of information, and for areas that might be, what I actually found was for areas that might be a little bit of a gray area, what does this setting truly mean if you don't really understand what Oracle outlines? We actually did resort to Google a few times and get some more user-based explanations. There's a lot of good blogs, a lot of good feedback out there that helped with that, but Oracle's documentation is probably the most complete that I've seen. And I could try and find it and put it in the chat here. But it really, I think a simple Oracle S-base config file settings search would warrant a very valuable response. Again, from Oracle, that is.
All right, thank you for that. Our next question is from Adnan. They ask, why was Cloud EPM not chosen as an upgrade option?
Great question. We get that often. As with the cloud push, we did present that as an option. At this point, the simple answer was that the customer wasn't ready. They had a lot of internal processes that they didn't want to redesign. Their applications were more built for that purpose. So their mindset was really getting them onto a supported system while they decide how they want to approach the push to the cloud. So it was really just a customer decision based on their current footprint and what they were willing to undertake at this point in time.
Perfect. From Salvatore, great presentation. What was your greatest challenge in planning?
Yeah, so in planning, I would say From a usability perspective, it was really determining, initially what the config issues were. Like I said, we never pinpointed exactly what the problem was, but once we were able to stabilize that and understand the settings, planning has been very seamless, very effortless as far as, both the implementation and the subsequent day-to-day management. It really does look and feel, it acts the same as what the 11124 system would. And so there's not a whole lot of difference. So as far as look and feel, I was able personally to not just go into the 11124 system, but also pull up the 112 system side by side, and they work and operate exactly the same. So greatest challenge would have probably been the initial app migration and trying to figure out what was going on there.
All right. From Demansu, how long did it take to stabilize the system after the upgrade?
Yeah, so stabilizing the system, we did a little bit of work initially. From a stabilization perspective, I look at it in a couple different ways. I look at performance of the system as well as, unexpected outages, for example. So for performance, we kind of took our baseline at what their existing environment was. So, and taking that within reason, of course. So there were some settings that we actually saw. One of the inconsistencies with their old environment was they had some that were set to I think they had it on an Exalytics platform on one of the servers. And so they had some of the settings, like the memory settings were set to like a 32 gigabyte minimum, which is unbelievable to me. Normally we set that at 1 gigabyte as a baseline with a maximum of 4 gigabytes, depending on the service. Some of them vary there from service to service, but generally speaking, the system was fairly stable at first. And I think there was only one or two things that took, it was really once we went live, once we had more users in the system, that we really started saying, okay, maybe we can tweak this a little bit. And it was minor tweaks, things like maybe some stuck thread timers, some minor memory adjustments to services that may get a little more use than what they would have on Windows. What we noticed though with this one is with Linux, it just, again, I don't have the proof to show it, but Linux seems to be able to handle those kinds of requests better. So one of the things that I would say we were able to take from this was we were able to take the Linux system and actually detune it more than if we were to go straight to Windows, and it operated the same. So effectively saving them in resource cost in the long run. So but it wasn't long. It was, I would say, we did a lot of tuning in our our QA process. But I would say to really feel it out, it was maybe a week or two in each environment before we really figured out, okay, this is good, or we need to make minor tweaks here and there.
All right, we do have one more question. I'll go
Okay.
ahead and read off. And we do have some more time. If any other attendees would like to post their questions or comments, feel free to do so. But from Brandon, have you upgraded HFM from 11.1.2.4 to 11.2? And what are the implications of changing the database from SQL Server to Oracle database?
Great question. Yes. As you know, this one did not have HFM involved, but we have done the upgrade from 11.124 to 11.2. The process is very similar. Now, as you're speaking about the database migration, so that's one thing that we haven't done yet, is going from one to the other as far as SQL Server to Oracle DB. I know there are some conversion tools out there that allow you to do that. I don't recall if they're HFM specific or if they're more SQL to Oracle based. The one thing I know is, the upgrade process, if you aren't familiar with it, does involve running the upgrade against your HFM repository. So you have, it will present you with the option to upgrade the applications, and it just takes it and runs with it. So the process there, like if I were to kind of backtrack and say SQL Server to SQL Server, process is incredibly straightforward. You click a button and it goes. You migrate the repository and the database beforehand. It's all there and set up. What I would have to assume, and I would have to do a little bit of research on it, is what I would have to assume is if you found a tool that was able to migrate or convert SQL Server to Oracle, you effectively would just take that and place your, if you're going to Oracle, you would place your Oracle DB in place and then run your upgrade applications against it. So it would just really depend on making sure that the conversion is successful. I know it's doable. I do know that there, it's not a new topic. There's definitely a lot of people that have asked that, wanting to go to a different OS, different database provider. So the process is out there. I'm just not fully familiar with it personally. And I know I'll take a quick second. I'm going to put something in the chat here for the S-based config settings. I just put a link in the chat to it's the categorical list for the S-based config settings. So that really kind of, you can take that and pinpoint into a lot of areas of focus and be able to, like I said, really dig into some of these settings and get an explanation of what they are, what the ranges or what the different settings for them are, things like that. So hopefully that helps a little bit.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Shandy, for that. And for, once again, such a great informative presentation. And thank you, audience, for your participation, for the questions. Let's see, looks like Donna just posted to complete their evaluation at datavail.com/ERP Hyperion survey. So you'll be eligible to win a Fire TV Cube. Ooh, that sounds like a great opportunity. Thank you, Donna, for posting that. Again, a lot of positive feedback from the audience. So thank you,
Awesome.
Shandy. Thank you to everyone for attending. And that concludes our webinar for today.
Yeah, thank you as well. Yeah, everyone, Amelia, thank you for hosting and appreciate it.